Along the North Atlantic coast of the United States, North American tribes like the Nansemonds, the Pequots, the Mohawks, and the Mattaponi were the first to greet European settlers and the first to witness the horror of their recklessness toward the land. Settlers began clearing the forest to send lumber back to Europe and opened the land plots for agricultural development. Tribes in the Atlantic coastal region gathered shells called wampum along the beaches and made them into necklaces, adorned fabric for ceremonial use, and gave them as gifts to one another. After the Europeans arrived and began establishing local governments, they too gave wampum shells offerings to the tribes. For Native Americans, the wampum was received as a gesture of goodwill. For the Europeans, however, it was a legal exchange for the land the tribes were living on.
Everything about our life seemed to be centered around trees and wood. I mean, our houses were made completely of wood. The earliest ancestors had to use wood for shelter here. There was abundance of it until one of the missionaries came here and decided, well, we will sell the Indians wood and make a lot of money. And they came with their wagons and cut as much wood as they could here in Mashpee. Our tribal women moved their families to the ocean front. And at the far end, where you see the point, is where they encamped. And the women constructed their dwellings, and they used young saplings that bent easily and the vines to tie them down, and placed mats on them that they wove from reeds. These were easy to transport from inland out to the ocean front. And they established their gardens near the trees because that particular area held topsoil. And they were able to grow a lot of vegetables very easily. They would get partial sun, and the hottest part of the day they were shaded by the trees. We also use different types of branches to smoke our fish. Cherry and apple and pine, cedar. These were burnt and the fish were held over those fires to preserve the fish for the winter. The women did all of this preserving, most of it, while they were at the ocean front. And when they went back inland, they had dried food that would last all winter. A lot of times we see weed-toos or wigwams whereby they had one big hole in the roof, and that was to release the smoke. And under that hole were hung meats and fish to smoke.
In a portion of the Pequot Tribe's Museum and Research Center in Connecticut stands a life-size reconstruction of tribal village life in the early 1600s. For Native American artists involved in the research and reconstruction of the village, it became a sacred journey into their cultural past and heightened their appreciation for the importance of passing on traditional knowledge.
Trees were our main way of protecting ourselves from the element, the way we're using them right here, right now for our homes. What we had were cedar frames, and we would peel the bark off the cedar, and we'd get the saplings and bend them over. And then we would cover the frames with different types of bark: tulip poplar bark, ash bark, hemlock bark. Also, they would have been covered with elm bark, but there aren't too many elm trees left around. They covered them with these if they were going to be living in them year-round, and they would hold out the elements pretty well. In the summertime, they would cover the homes with cattail reeds, and the cattail reeds were good because they were more easily taken down and moved. You could throw up a cattail wigwam in a day if the frame was already put up. And what they would do is they would put up a frame in their summer camps, summer areas, and they would they would move away from their permanent winter homes, which would be larger villages, and they'd move to their smaller summer camps, which were more or less situated either in the middle of their cornfields or over towards their fishing areas. And these were food gathering camps, and they would fill up the wigwams until they filled up with food, and then they'd dry everything and smoke everything and put it into their storage pits. And when the wintertime came, they'd take the cattail mats down, and they would either, if they weren't good enough to go up the next year, they would use them to line storage pits. And probably the best thing that I've learned about this is, you know, the continuity that it gave us, this generation here, with the older generation. And when I'm older, it'll probably be able to pass that on to the younger ones, because I know how to do it, not just something that I knew that people used to do and I might know how to do it, but it's something that we actually hands-on did.
The clear understanding of their interdependence with the land held Nansemond tribal villages together physically and socially, and nurtured in them a deep and pervasive connection with the Creator.
I think one of the important things that people everywhere need to know, always had the history that the Native Americans of this Western Hemisphere were very pagan, very savage, very non-religious. In fact, they were probably the most spiritual people that the Europeans had ever run across. I think one of the big differences being the fact that the Europeans were accustomed to owning things. The Americans and the Native Americans in North America were accustomed to sharing things. They didn't believe in the ownership of land. It was there for everyone's use. What you obtained from the land you would share. And I think that was a big difference. The Nansemond tribe was one of the 32 tribes under Chief Powhatan. All of those tribes were eastern woodland tribes. All of the tribes lived on or near waterways. That led to their having to make so many canoes, and the canoes were made out of two types of trees, primarily the cypress and the juniper. The fact that they both held up very well underwater, water resistant. Now, they had two primarily ways of maintaining the lifestyle. One was by getting their seafood. The other was by going into the woods on extended hunts, where they primarily would hunt deer, bears, turkeys. They were not nomadic in nature. They were very well settled down. They had a very good political structure. The type of dwellings that the various tribes in the Tidewater area used, the woodland Indian tribes and the Powhatan, we called them longhouses. Now, the way you would construct them would be that you would make a series of holes in the ground, two lines parallel, and in each hole you'd put a limb sapling. You would arch them over and tie them together. You might use the word lash them together. Now, next to the longhouse, you observed a small garden. Behind that garden, you saw another small structure that was on a platform or scaffold-like. That was a little structure used to put children in or other people to serve as a scarecrow to keep the fowl and the other critters out of the vegetation, whether it was corn, beans, gourds.
The Nansemond would often plant a tree to mark the grave of a loved one, both as an act of respect and an honoring of their family members returned to Mother Earth. The Mohican tribe is steeped in the tradition of the Tree of Life. Their reliance on trees exemplifies tribal life in the past and in the present.
Trees provided quite a few utensils that you may not see in any museum, if only because probably 3/4 of pre-contact people's work kits were organic, either bone or wood, or made out of, well, animal or vegetable products. And with the acidity of our soil, the only thing that remains are the tools that were made out of stone. So you can use, well, wood makes the frame for your snowshoes. I have a really old quiver at home that is leather stretched over a wood frame. Wood makes the shaft of your arrows. Wood makes the mortar to pound out the powdered parched corn that we call yolk egg. Of course, we use a stone pestle. The tree of life is the red cedar. Our people hold it with some reverence. It is held in various ceremonials. We use it to smudge with. We also make sure that our burials include a piece or a branch of red cedar, not only because it's evergreen, but also it has the meaning to us that it offers promise and hope. It is the first tree back after a clear burn. It is a tree that is stiffened with adversity. You'll always find, if nothing else, red cedar growing on top of an esker, a glacial esker, where there's no nutrients underneath. So we really hold the red cedar close to us. We are the wolf people, children of Mundu, a part of the tree of life. Our ancestors form our roots. Our living tribe is the trunk. Our grandchildren are the buds of our future. We remember and teach the stories of our ancestors. We watch, we listen, we learn. We respect Mother Earth, our elders, and all that comes from Mundu. We are willing to break arrows of peace to heal old and new wounds. We acknowledge and learn from our mistakes. We walk as a single spirit on the trail of life. We are guided by 13 generations past and responsible to 13 generations to come. We survive as a nation guided by the wisdom of our past. Our circular trail returns us to the wholeness as a people. Ni-ai-yo. It is so.
Chief Jake Swamp modeled himself after the peacemaker who lived many years ago and who encouraged the end of years of fighting among tribes of the Northeast. The peacemaker, as he was called, led the people to bury their weapons, bringing an end to violence against each other and in the beginning of peace in the region. The peacemaker chose the white pine tree as a sign of peace that followed.
At that time, about 1,000 years ago, the peacemaker placed an eagle on top of the white pine tree. And he is a symbol of seeing very far into the future, because the eagle is known to have a very good vision. And so he felt that the people needed a symbol to go by, and that was the eagle. Eagle's eye view of the future. If at a time, any time in the future, anything was coming towards them, they would always be visionary. They would recognize a danger approaching, and they would all come together to meet it head on, whatever was coming their direction. And he also gave them a prediction at that time when he established the great white pine as a symbol for the peace that they had established. First, they had buried all the weapons of war and placed it under the tree of peace. And then the 4 white roots went into the 4 directions. And the purpose of those roots was to spread the peace. And then he told the first leaders to stand in a circle and to enjoin their hands in a circle. He said the day would be coming when a people would come. They would not understand the purpose of these white roots that are extended to the 4 directions. Instead, what they would do is they will be threatened by this root. And they will take sharp objects and they will start to hack at the roots. And they will start to move slowly and they will go towards the trunk of the tree. He said the day will come when the tree will weaken. And then he turned to the leaders again and he said, "You, the leaders, will remain strong with your joined hands. As when this tree falls it will land on your arms, and you will hold it there for a long time, burdened with its weight and its heaviness. You shall never permit it to touch the ground, for if you do, peace will never come back. And so he said, this is what's going to happen when you are burdened with its heaviness. There will be children born in the future, and when they look in your direction, and they will see how burdened you are, then many of them will get together, and they will start running towards you. And they will get under this tree, and they will help you to raise this tree again. But it will be for the last time. And there's a prophecy in our nation that says that when the people start to find themselves again, they're coming from other directions. When they find themselves again, they will bring them with them their experiences, and they will put it into one bundle. And when everybody has put out the experiences together and put it into one bundle, then the bundle will be tied, and it will be very sacred time.
Chief Jake Swamp continues the work of the peacemaker through the Tree of Peace Society, planting indigenous trees and peace ceremonies throughout the world. We know that living with the trees in nature can sensitize humans to become observant and compassionate toward the needs of other living beings. Once we learn to provide opportunities for our children to experience the gifts of nature, to sensitize their souls and introduce them to the importance of their role as stewards of the land, we will have given them everything.
If you can bring children into an area like this and bring children back into nature, it doesn't have to be on an everyday basis, but to bring them in once a week or once a month, whenever you can, spend a couple with them in nature. And you don't know how many children that are right here in a city like this that have never ever sit and listen to a squirrel chatter, that have never listened to the birds talking. Hear the birds when you're walking through the woods, the birds telling the other birds that, hey, there are people coming up the trail, and never ever have they touched the moss on a moss tree, or they've never touched the bark on any of the cypress that are out here, and have never even seen the beautiful turtles that sit on the logs and sun themselves. These are things that they need to be brought back to and brought away from the television and the computer, as I'd said before, and back into nature. They need to be brought into an awareness of all the little things around them that can make them and bring them a blessing in life and bring them a happiness in life. Hundreds of years ago and still today, that we try to teach our children, if you will look and if you will listen, you will learn and you will survive. And this includes our environmental impact. They have to look, they have to listen, and they have to learn, or we won't survive. Some of the things that we have lost in vast nature, like the cedar trees and the different pine trees that we so much generously use the saps from and used for healing process. If you look at just about any bottle of cough syrup or any bottle of medicine in a drugstore on a counter today, you'll look at the back of that bottle, Apanol from the pine tree, and it's used for abrasions, for sores, for body ulcers, things like that, skin cancers. And you'll find these things, these medicinal purposes in medicines that they call everyday medicines, over-the-counter medicines today. Mentholatum from the mentholyptus tree, or from the plants themselves, from the spearmint plants that are used in cough drops and in cough syrups. You'll find all these things that were traditionally used in medicinal purposes that are used today. And so if we don't think by killing off these forests and killing off these vegetations that we're not killing off only our medicinal plants and natural uses, but killing off the over-the-counter medicines that we have, then they're wrong.
When a person understands the interdependence indigenous people have with nature, it becomes very clear why we call the earth Mother.
We would go down to the riverbank and we would pick the reeds from the grass from the riverbank, and then we would put them together, and while they were green, we could make rope out of these. And when they were dry, we had to wet it down in water in order to make it pliable for making rope out of. But we'd put as many pieces of the grass together for the thickness of rope that we needed, and we would separate it into two parts. And first we would twist the piece of rope this way and hold it tight with our finger, and then we would twist the other side, and then we would wrap one side over the other, and then we would keep on twisting. And the women and children had to make 5 miles of this rope a day because we used an awful lot of rope. And we used it for tying down our longhouses with. We used it for making our rope baskets with. And this is how we made our rope.
We are not allowing the environment to become part of us. It's not part of our lives. Do they really care whether they're chopping down forests? Do they really care about saving what is there? And you don't see it. And I think this is where we're missing the boat with all of the environmental groups. They're not stressing the need that this is a part of your life. I'm not against growth process or building or people having homes. I'm against destroying what is unnecessary to make it happen. And this is what I see taking place. It's transpiring at a rapid clip. Greed is a terrible disease. Very difficult to compete. Greed is a predator. And I think we have a duty and an obligation, and I cannot reiterate that enough, to try to show the connection, that we are connected. Truly, truly, we belong to each other. We have a duty and an obligation to each other and to those that will come after us. And if not our posterity, all posterity, because they all belong to us. And we have as much of a duty to preserve what is growing as we do the child. And you know, every time people question about life, think about what blooms every year, comes back. If the Creator does this for a tree and a flower and all that comes from the earth, what must He do for the human being and the soul? And that soul is connected to everything that grows from this earth. You know, I realize this planet's on loan, and the Creator gave us the greatest gift He could give us. And I think we should take, my grandfather used to say to me, we have to take care of this place like it was a library book, Thomasina. And you've got to make sure that when you return it to the public library, it's in the same condition as when you took it out, so that someone else has the opportunity to use it. I shudder to think that today, if the Creator asked for this planet back, what condition we would give it in. Do you ever think about that? This would be a tragedy. When I was a little girl in school, the sister, I was in a parochial school, the sister, we were studying about coat of arms and the coats of arms that the different countries had, whether you were from France, whether you were Capet, or whether or not you happened to belong to the Plantagenets or the Windsors. They had all of the different family crests. And I went home to my grandfather and I said, what is our family crest? We're an Indian family living on Cape Cod. And another person would have said, well, Thompson, we don't have one. We're Indian people. But he didn't. He sat down and he took a piece of paper and he drew a circle. And he put a deer and a fish and a rabbit, a bird, all of the animals that were there and a tree, and he said, this is who we are. This is our crest. We are of the land. We're all connected. All of this.
In the Indian point of view, earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. All things are connected, like the blood which unites the family of man. What we think and say and do to each other is how we think and speak and act toward the land. It's all a part of one story. If we listen in earnest to the spirit of the trees, what new relationships will we build? What new visions will we share? What journeys will we take? And what living knowledge will be witness to our actions on behalf of Mother Earth?